I thought I knew the scent of my husband's skin better than I knew my own name. Sandalwood, cedar, and the faint metallic tang of the glass forge where he spent his days. But tonight, as Kellan stepped through the door of our Savannah brownstone, he smelled like hospital bleach and a perfume that wasn't mine. He didn't look at me. He never looked at me anymore. Kellan? My voice was a jagged shard of glass. It's 3 a.m. Your phone was off. He paused, his back a broad, rigid wall of charcoal wool. I saw his shoulders drop, just a fraction, a movement so small most people would miss it, but I've spent 10 years mapping the geography of this man's body. I was at the studio, Amani, he said. His voice was a low rumble, but it lacked its usual warmth. It felt hollow, like a drum played in an empty room. The studio doesn't use bleach, Kellan, and it certainly doesn't wear Chanel No. 5. He finally turned. His eyes, usually a deep, comforting amber, were bloodshot and rimmed with a darkness I didn't recognize. He looked like a man who was drowning in plain sight, but every time I reached out a hand, he swam further into the deep end. "Don't do this tonight," he whispered. He walked past me, the air turning cold in his wake. I stood there in the hallway, the silence of our home feeling like a physical weight on my chest. We were supposed to be the golden couple, Kellan, the visionary architect, and I, the glassblower who captured light in bottles. But lately, the light was going out. Before I tell you what I found in the pocket of his coat 5 minutes later, I need to know, where are you joining me from today? Are you tucked in bed or maybe on your morning commute? Drop your city in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And honestly, I need your company for this one. This story, it's gonna go places you won't expect. I reached for his coat, which he draped over the mahogany chair. My fingers were trembling. I wasn't a snooper. I was a wife who felt her world tilting off its axis. My hand dived into the inner pocket. My fingers brushed against something cold. A key. Not a house key. A heavy, industrial-looking key with a plastic tag that had a room number scribbled on it. 304. And below that, a name. The Willow Crest Retreat. My heart did a slow, painful somersault. Willow Crest wasn't a hotel. It was a high-end private hospice and neurological care facility. Who was in room 304, and why was my husband paying for it in secret? To understand why that heavy industrial key felt like a jagged blade in my gut, you have to understand the man Kellan used to be. You have to understand the foundation we built. Because in Savannah, foundations are everything. They're what keep these old, beautiful homes from sinking into the marsh. And our foundation? It was made of fire and absolute, unshakable truth. We didn't just meet, we collided. It was 10 years ago, a Tuesday in New Orleans that felt like the city was breathing steam. I was a 22-year-old art student struggling with a massive wooden crate of glass supplies, heavy silica, iron molds, things that had no business being carried by one person. The strap of my bag snapped, the crate slipped, and I braced myself for the sound of shattering dreams. But the crash never came. Two large, calloused hands caught the wood just inches from the pavement. I looked up, wiped a stray braid from my sweaty forehead, and there he was, Kellan. He was wearing a simple white linen shirt rolled up at the elbows, showing off forearms that looked like they were carved from mahogany. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, and most of it is breakable," he said. His voice wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration, deep, steady, and honey thick. I could barely breathe. "I'm Amani," I managed to stammer. "I'm Kellan, and Amani, I think I'm going to be the man who helps you carry things for a very long time." He didn't just carry my crate that day, he carried my heart. We spent that first night sitting on a crumbling stone wall in the Garden District, eating beignets until our clothes were dusted with powdered sugar, talking until the streetlights flickered out. He told me about his obsession with light, how he wanted to build skyscrapers that didn't just block the sun, but invite it in. I told him about my obsession with capturing breath in glass. "We're a perfect match," he'd whispered, his thumb grazing my lower lip. "I build the cages, and you create the soul that lives inside them." When we moved to Savannah and bought our historic brownstone on Jones Street, we were the envy of everyone. We were the golden couple of the South. I can still smell the scent of those early years. It was a mix of floor wax, old books, and the constant underlying heat of our desire. We didn't just live together, we merged. Kellan was a man of tactile strength. He didn't just say he loved me, he showed it in the way he occupied space. He'd come into my studio at the end of a long day, his expensive suit jacket tossed aside, and he'd just stand there watching me work the furnace. The heat would be 2,000 degrees, the air thick with the smell of scorched oxygen, and he wouldn't flinch. "You're a goddess of fire, Amani," he'd say, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, heedless of the sweat or the soot on my skin. He'd press his face into the crook of my neck, his breath warm against my skin. The buildings I design, they're just stone and steel. They're cold. But you're the light that makes the stone worth looking at. Without you, I'm just an architect of empty boxes. He used to have this ritual. Every Friday night, no matter how busy his firm was, he'd cook. He'd put on some old-school Miles Davis, pour 2 glasses of deep red Cabernet, and he'd spend hours making low-country boil or smothered chops. He said the kitchen was the only place where he didn't have to be perfect, because the only person he had to please was me. I remember one night, about 3 years ago, we were sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace. The rain was drumming against the tall windows, and the Spanish moss outside was dancing in the wind. Kellan was tracing the lines of my palm with his finger, his touch so light it made me shiver. "Kellan," he said softly, his amber eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt like it could see into my future. "Promise me something." "Anything, Kellan. Just promise me, if the world ever gets dark, if the walls ever start closing in, promise me you'll keep making your art. Promise me you won't let the shadows swallow your fire. You're the strongest person I know, but even the strongest person needs to remember to breathe." I laughed then, leading in to kiss the tip of his nose. "Why are you being so dramatic? We're fine. We're more than fine. We're indestructible." He didn't laugh back. He just pulled me closer, holding me with a grip that felt almost desperate, as if he was trying to anchor himself to me before a storm hit. "Just promise me," he whispered. "I promise," I said. How was I supposed to know that was the beginning of the end? How was I supposed to know the man who caught my falling crate was already starting to lose himself slowly? The change didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. It started 6 months ago. The Friday night dinners stopped. The Miles Davis records gathered dust. The man who used to map my body with his hands started flinching when I touched him. "Kellan, you're home late again," I'd say, standing in the kitchen at midnight, the dinner I'd made sitting cold on the counter. "I'm busy, Amani. The Atlanta project is a nightmare. Can we not do this right now?" His voice, once a warm vibration, had become a sharp, brittle thing. He wouldn't look at me. He'd stare at the wall or his phone or his hands, always his hands. He started rubbing his left thumb against his index finger, a repetitive, nervous motion that drove me crazy. Maybe I'm just tired of being the man everyone expects me to be. Maybe I'm just tired, period. And then came the smells, the hospital bleach, the feminine perfume, the business trips that didn't have a return flight number. Every time I tried to reach for him, he'd pull further into the shadows. He'd stay at the studio until 4 a.m., and when he did come home, he'd sleep on the far edge of the bed, a million miles away, even though I could hear his heartbeat. Which brings me back to that hallway, back to that charcoal wool coat and the key to room 304. I stood there in the silence of our home, the heavy key biting into the palm of my hand. My mind was a whirlwind of dark possibilities. Was he keeping her there? A sick lover? A secret family? I felt like a fool. I had been the golden wife to a man who was building a life I knew nothing about. I made a choice in that moment. I wasn't going to be the victim of a silent house anymore. I was going to follow that key to whatever dark door it unlocked. I was going to find out who was in room 304, even if the truth burned everything we built to the ground. The next morning, the Savannah sun rose with a cruel, mocking brightness. It filtered through the slats of our bedroom shutters, casting long, cage-like shadows across the floor. I hadn't slept, not for a single second. I had spent the entire night curled on the bathroom floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek, staring at that key on the vanity. Kellan was already gone by the time the first bird chirped. No goodbye, no note on the pillow, just the lingering, sharp scent of that bleach and a silence so loud it made my ears ring. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of an artist, scarred from heat, steady enough to pull hair-thin strands of glass from a molten glob. But today, they were shaking so violently I couldn't even button my own blouse. I had to settle for a silk wrap dress, something I could tie without thinking. I grabbed the key. Room 304, the Willow Crest Retreat. The drive out of the city was a blur of Spanish moss and ancient oaks that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. The humidity was already a physical weight, sticking my hair to the back of my neck. Savannah is a city built on secrets. Literally, the streets are paved over old graves, and the houses are filled with the ghosts of people who took their truths to the dirt. I felt like I was driving toward my own burial. The Willow Crest Retreat wasn't what I expected. I expected a sterile, white-walled hospital. Instead, I found a sprawling estate of red brick and ivy tucked behind a wrought iron gate that screamed old money. It looked like a place where the wealthy came to hide their tragedies. I parked the car, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump. Room 304. Thump, thump. Who is she? I stepped into the lobby. The air conditioning was so cold it felt like a slap. The floor was polished white marble, reflecting the crystal chandelier above like a mirror. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. A woman sat behind a massive mahogany desk. She had silver hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful, and glasses that hung from a gold chain. She looked up as I approached, her eyes scanning me with professional curiosity. "Good morning. Welcome to Willowcrest. How can I assist you today?" Her voice was like parchment, dry and thin. I cleared my throat, trying to find the voice of the woman who used to run $1 million glass studio, not the woman whose life was falling apart. "I'm here to see the resident in room 304. The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She didn't ask for a name. She didn't ask who I was. She just looked at me for a long, silent moment. "Are you a relative, dear?" "I'm his wife," I said. The word felt heavy, like I was claiming something that didn't belong to me anymore. The receptionist's expression shifted. The professional mask didn't slip, but it softened. A look of profound, devastating pity crossed her face. "Oh, you're Mrs. Vance, Mr. Kellan Vance's wife." "Yes," I whispered. Is she in there? The patient?" The pause held a beat too long. "The patient is in the room, yes. It's a difficult day, Mrs. Vance. He's had a bit of a rough morning. Third floor, left out of the elevator. Room 304 is at the very end of the hall." I didn't wait for her to say more. I turned and ran for the elevator. My mind was screaming. He's had a rough morning? Was he living here? Was he splitting his time between our bed and this place? Was this woman so important that he had abandoned his life for her? The elevator ride felt like an eternity. I stared at the brass numbers as they lit up. 1, 2, 3. Ding! The hallway was carpeted in a deep, hushed blue. The walls were lined with serene paintings of landscapes, fields of lavender, calm oceans. It was designed to be peaceful, but to me, it felt like a tomb. I walked past room 301, room 302, room 303. I stopped in front of 304. The door was heavy, solid oak. There was no nameplate, just the number. I stood there for a heartbeat, my hand hovering over the handle. I expected to hear voices. I expected to hear laughter, or maybe the soft sounds of a television. Instead, I heard a sound that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It was a low, rhythmic scratching, like a bird trapped in a box. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't perfume. It wasn't even bleach. It was the smell of my own studio, linseed oil, charcoal, and the metallic tang of graphite. The room was bathed in a strange flickering light. I stepped inside and my breath left my body in a ragged gasp. The walls weren't white. They weren't even visible. Every square inch of the room, from the baseboards to the ceiling, was covered in paper, sketches, hundreds of them, thousands. I walked toward the nearest wall, my fingers trembling as I touched a piece of charcoal-smudged parchment. It was a drawing of a hand, my hand, the way my thumb curved when I held a glass-blowing pipe. I moved to the next one. It was a sketch of my eyes, just the eyes. They looked startled, wide with a laugh I remembered from our honeymoon in Amalfi. I turned in a slow circle, my head spinning. It was a gallery of me. Me sleeping, me eating, me crying, me in the shower, the water turning into lines of graphite. But as I looked closer, the drawings changed. In the older ones, the lines were crisp, perfect, the work of the master architect I knew. But the newer ones, they were fractured. The lines were shaky. In one, my face was split down the middle. In another, my features were melting into the background, as if I were being erased by the very hand that drew me. "Amani?" The voice came from the corner of the room, near the window. I turned. Kellan was sitting in a high-backed leather chair. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was wearing the same charcoal wool coat from the night before, but his shirt was misbuttoned. His hair, usually perfectly groomed, was a chaotic mess. He held a piece of charcoal in his left hand. His right hand was tucked into his lap, hidden under a blanket. "I can't get the chin right," he whispered. His voice was hollow, stripped of all the resonance that used to fill our home. "I can remember the way your neck feels when I kiss it. I can remember the way you smell like jasmine and heat. But the chin, the way it dips when you're about to say something stubborn, it's slipping, Amani. The bridge is falling down." "Kellan, look at me," I said, stepping over a pile of discarded sketches. "I'm right here. You don't have to draw me. I'm right in front of you." He finally lifted his head. When his eyes met mine, I didn't see the man who'd caught my crate in New Orleans. I saw a stranger trapped in my husband's skin. His amber eyes were clouded, darting back and forth as if he were trying to superimpose the woman in his head on the woman standing in the room. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "I had a plan. I had a whole design for how this was supposed to go. This isn't part of the blueprint." "To hell with your blueprints, Kellan. Tell me what is happening. Why are you in a hospice? Who is the patient?" He let out a dry, rattling sob and pulled the blanket off his lap. He held out his right hand. It wasn't steady. It wasn't the hand that designed skyscrapers. It was curled into a tight, claw-like knot, shaking with a violent, rhythmic tremor that he couldn't stop. "The patient is me, Amani," he choked out. "The patient is me." I stared at his hand. I couldn't stop staring at it. That hand had designed the skyline of Atlanta. That hand had held me through the death of my mother, through the birth of my first glass studio, through every midnight storm we'd ever weathered. Now it was a frantic, vibrating thing that looked like it didn't even belong to his arm. "Kellan," I whispered, my voice so small it barely made it across the room. I reached out, my fingers trembling just as much as his, trying to capture that shaking hand in mine. He flinched. He actually pulled away, tucking the hand back under the safety of the heavy wool blanket. "Don't touch it, Amani. If you touch it, it's real. As long as I was here, in this room, with these walls, I could pretend it was just a nightmare I was having in the studio." A nightmare. Kellan, you've been disappearing for months. You've been cold. You've been cruel. You've let me believe that our marriage was a lie. My voice rose, the pain finally turning into a hot, searing anger. I thought you were with another woman. I thought that bleach smell was, I don't know, a hotel, a hospital. I thought you were leaving me. He looked up then, and the raw agony in his eyes silenced me. I was leaving you, Amani. That's the point. I was trying to leave you before I became someone you'd have to pity. He stood up, or he tried to. He stumbled, his left leg dragging slightly against the expensive carpet. I moved to catch him, my arms automatically finding the familiar solidness of his waist, but he pushed me back with a strength born of pure desperation. Stay back, he barked. It wasn't his voice. It was a jagged, desperate sound. I have corticobasal degeneration, Amani. Go ahead, say it. It's a mouthful, isn't it? The doctors call it CBD. It's rare, it's aggressive, it's a thief. I felt the room tilt. The hundreds of sketches of my own face seemed to spin on the walls. What does it do? Kellan sat back down heavily, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. It starts with the hands, the tremors, the loss of coordination. Then it moves to the legs, then the speech, and then the mind. It's like a slow-motion erasure. My brain is literally forgetting how to tell my body to be a human being, and eventually, it'll forget how to tell me who you are. I collapsed onto the edge of the clinical bed, my legs giving out. How long? How long have you known? 8 months, he whispered, since that night in July. Remember when I said I got lost coming home from the office? I didn't get lost, Amani. I sat at a red light 3 blocks from our house for 20 minutes because I couldn't remember what the color green meant. I forgot how to drive. I sat there while people honked and cursed at me, and I just cried because I didn't know where I was. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had been so angry that night. I'd accused him of being late because he was drinking with his partners. I called him selfish. Why didn't you tell me? I sobbed, the tears finally overflowing, hot and bitter. We're a team, Kellan, in sickness and in health. Those weren't just words we said in a church in New Orleans. They were a vow. I know what they were, he roared, slamming his good hand against the arm of the chair. But I looked at you, Amani. I looked at you in the forge, glowing in the light of the furnace, creating masterpieces that will last forever. You are so full of life, so full of fire. How could I tie you to a dying man? How could I ask you to spend the best years of your career changing my diapers and watching me forget your name? He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. I could see the sweat on his brow, the gray hair that had sprouted in his beard over the last few weeks. I made a choice, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I decided I'd rather you hate me. I thought if I acted distant, if I smelled like the clinics I was visiting, if I let you believe there was someone else, you'd leave. You'd get a divorce. You'd find a man who could actually hold you without shaking. I wanted you to have a clean break while you still had your heart intact. You think my heart is intact right now? I screamed, grabbing the lapels of his coat and shaking him. You think watching you turn into a stranger is easier because I thought you were cheating? You robbed me of 8 months. 8 months where I could have been holding you, where we could have been fighting this together. There is no fighting this, Amani. There is no cure. There is only the end. He grabbed my wrists with his trembling hands. The contact was electric, painful, and deeply familiar. Even with the tremor, I knew the strength of those fingers. The perfume, I gasped, a sudden realization hitting me. The Chanel No. 5. I smelled it on your coat. If there's no other woman, then why? Kellan closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking through the stubble on his cheek. My mother, she used to wear it. When the episodes get bad, when I can't remember where I am, the nurses here, they use aromatherapy. They use the scents from my childhood to ground me, to keep me from panicking. It wasn't a mistress, Amani. It was a memory. I let go of his coat, my hands falling into my lap. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the scent of charcoal and the distant sound of a medical cart rattling in the hallway. I looked around the room again, at the sketches. "That's why you're drawing me," I whispered. "Every day, every hour you're here." "I'm trying to build a fortress," he said, looking at a particularly beautiful sketch of me laughing. "I'm trying to etch your image so deep into my retinas that even when the disease burns through my memories, it can't find you. I spend 6 hours a day drawing your eyes, your lips, the way your hair curls behind your ear, because I'm terrified that one morning I'll wake up and you'll just be a pretty stranger." He looked at his shaking hand, the movement never ceasing. "But my hand is losing the battle, Amani. The lines are getting blurrier. My blueprint is failing." I stood up and walked over to him. I didn't care if he pushed me away this time. I sat on the arm of his chair and pulled his head against my chest. He resisted for a second, his body rigid with pride and grief, and then he broke. He turned his face into my stomach and sobbed, deep, gut-wrenching sounds that I felt in my own marrow. "I'm so scared," he choked out. "Amani, I'm so scared of being alone in the dark." "You're not going to be alone," I said steadily, as my world crumbled. "And you're not going to live in this room like a secret. We're going home, Kellan, today." He pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his shaking hand. "I can't go home. The stairs, the equipment I need, the way you'll look at me when I can't feed myself." "You're right," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I will look at you. I will look at you every single day, and I will see the man who caught my crate in New Orleans. I will see the man who built a gallery for my light, and if you forget who I am, that's fine, because I will never, ever forget who you are. I have enough memory for the both of us." But as I said it, I looked at the desk in the corner. There was a stack of legal documents I hadn't noticed before. At the very top, in bold letters, it said "Voluntary Permanent Commitment." Kellan had already signed his life away, and as I looked at the date on the paper, my heart stopped. He was supposed to be admitted permanently tomorrow. I didn't just tell the nurse we were leaving. I grabbed that voluntary permanent commitment form, the one with Kellan's shaky, unrecognizable signature at the bottom, and I ripped it. I didn't just tear it, I shredded it until the pieces looked like the white confetti we'd thrown at our wedding. "Amani, stop," Kellan whispered from his chair, his voice a ghost of its former self. "That paper, it was my safety net. It was my way of protecting you from the wreckage." I turned to him, my chest heaving, my eyes burning with a fire that hadn't been there in months. "You don't protect the woman you love by throwing her away, Kellan. You protect her by letting her in. We're going home. We're going to Jones Street, and we're going to live in our house until the walls fall down." The drive back to Savannah was silent, but it wasn't the cold, dead silence of the previous weeks. It was the silence of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss and deciding to jump together. Kellan stared out the window at the passing marshlands, his right hand gripped tightly in his left, trying to keep the tremor from shaking his whole body. When we pulled up to our brownstone, the sight of it felt like a punch to the gut. The house looked exactly the same, the black shutters, the blooming azaleas, the polished brass knocker. But as I helped Kellan out of the car, I realized our home was no longer a sanctuary. It was an obstacle course. "I can do it," he snapped as I reached for his elbow at the first step. "I know you can," I said, pulling my hand back as if it had been burned. I was just adjusting my bag. It was the first lie of many. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in the push and the pull. The push was Kellan's pride, a massive, jagged thing that he used to shield himself. He wanted to be the man who designed skyscrapers. He wanted to be the man who could carry a tray of drinks without spilling a drop. The pull was the disease, dragging him backward into the dark, centimeter by agonizing centimeter. I spent my nights while he slept, or pretended to sleep, mapping the house. I bought a label maker, but I didn't just use words. I knew from the doctors that as the CBD progressed, his visual processing might falter. So I used textures. I put a strip of coarse sandpaper on the handle of the kettle so he'd know it was hot. I put a piece of soft velvet on the light switch for our bedroom. I put a jagged piece of dried coral on the door to the basement, a warning to stay away from the steep stairs. One morning, I found him in the kitchen. He was standing in front of the drawer where we kept the silverware. He was just staring. His right hand was tucked into the pocket of his robe, vibrating so hard I could hear the fabric rustling. "Kellan? Honey," I said softly, coming up behind him. "I forgot the name," he whispered. He didn't turn around. "I know what it's for. You use it to eat the soup. The metal thing, the round one. But the word, it's like a bird that flew out of the cage, Amani. I'm reaching for it, but it's gone." "It's a spoon," I said, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. "A spoon," he repeated. He said it over and over, trying to taste the word, trying to weld it back into his brain. Spoon, spoon, spoon. He suddenly grabbed a handful of silverware and threw it across the room. The clatter of stainless steel against the hardwood floor sounded like a symphony of failure. "I don't want your labels," he screamed, turning to face me. His eyes were wild, bloodshot. "I'm 45 years old, Amani. I'm supposed to be at the peak of my life, and I'm standing here being taught how to say spoon by my wife? I'm not teaching you, Kellan. I'm helping you. I don't want help. I want my brain back. I want my hands back." He held out his right hand, and for the first time, he didn't hide it. It was thrashing, a living thing that he couldn't control. "Look at it. This hand built a city, and now it can't even hold a piece of carchel." I walked towards him, ignoring the spoons scattered on the floor. I grabbed his shaking hand. He tried to pull away, his muscles tensing, but I held on with everything I had. I laced my fingers through his, forcing the tremor into my own arm, sharing the vibration. "Then use my hand," I whispered, looking him dead in the eye. "We're one person, remember? That's what you told me the day we got married. You said, 'Amani, from this day on, there is no more you or me. There is only us.'" He stopped struggling. His breath hitched, and he leaned his forehead against mine. We stood there in the middle of our beautiful kitchen, surrounded by scattered spoons and the smell of coffee, and we just breathed together. "I'm losing you," he choked out. "Every day, I feel a little more of you slipping away because I can't find the bridge to get to you." "I'm right here," I said, pulling his hand to my heart. "I'm the anchor, Kellan. You can drift as far as you need to, but I'm not letting go of the rope." That afternoon, I brought him to the forge. I hadn't worked since the day I found the key. The furnace was cold, the air in the studio smelling of dust and stagnant heat. Kellan sat in his usual chair, the one he'd sat in for 1,000 hours while he watched me work. "What are we doing here, Amani? I can't watch you work. It hurts too much to see you move so gracefully when I can't even walk to the mailbox without stumbling." "You're not going to watch," I said, turning on the gas. The roar of the furnace igniting was a familiar, comforting sound. It sounded like life. I took a glob of clear molten glass, a glowing orange sun on the end of the pipe. "Tell me about the first house you ever designed. Not the technical stuff. Tell me how it felt. Tell me how the light looked in the hallway at 4 p.m. Kellan hesitated. Then he closed his eyes. "It was in the hills of North Carolina. I wanted the house to feel like it was growing out of the rock. At 4 p.m., the sun would hit the floor-to-ceiling windows and turn the whole hallway into a river of gold. It didn't feel like a building. It felt like a cathedral for the trees." As he spoke, I moved. I didn't think. I let his words guide my hands. I twisted the glass, pulling it into long, flowing arcs. I added a dash of amber powder, letting it swirl into the clear crystal, like the river of gold he described. For the first time in months, the tremor in his hand slowed. He was focused. He was building. But as I reached for the shears to trim the eddies, Kellan's face suddenly went blank. The light in his eyes didn't just dim, they vanished. "Who are you?" he asked. The glass pipe slipped from my hand, clattering against the metal bench. The orange glow of the glass began to fade into a dull, angry red. "Kellan, it's me. It's Amani." He looked at me with the polite, distant curiosity of a man meeting a stranger on a bus stop. "You have a very nice voice, but I think I'm in the wrong place. I need to find my wife. Her name's Amani. She tastes like jasmine." He stood up, his legs shaking, and started walking towards the door, towards the street, towards the traffic of Savannah. "Kellan, wait!" I screamed, but he didn't stop. He was looking for me, and he was walking right past me to find the woman I used to be. I stood frozen in the heat of the forge, the cooling glass on my pipe turning a bruised, sickly purple. "Kellan!" I screamed, but he didn't even flinch. He walked out of the studio door with a purposeful stride that mocked his dragging leg. He was walking toward the Savannah riverfront, toward a world he no longer recognized, looking for a version of me that lived only in the attic of his dying mind. I dropped the pipe. The glass shattered into a million glittering diamonds on the concrete, and I ran. I caught him 2 blocks away, near a fountain where we'd had our first anniversary picnic. He was standing there, looking lost, his hands twitching at his sides. The tourists were walking past him, annoyed by the man standing still in the middle of the sidewalk. They didn't see the architect. They didn't see the genius. They just saw a black man who looked confused. "Sir, are you all right?" a young woman asked, stepping around him. "I'm looking for my wife," Kellan said, his voice polite but brittle. "She's supposed to meet me here. She wears jasmine. Have you seen her?" I stepped into his line of sight, my heart feeling like it was being put through a glass crusher. "Kellan, I'm right here." He looked at me. He looked through me. No, you're the lady from the workshop. You have soot on your face. My Amani, she's different. She's light." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Not this time. I took a deep breath, the humid Savannah air filling my lungs with the scent of river mud and old stone. If his brain was erasing my face, then I would have to speak to the parts of him that the disease couldn't touch. "Kellan, look at my hands," I said, holding them out between us. They were stained with charcoal and scarred from years of heat. "Do you remember the day you caught the crate in New Orleans? Your hands were under mine. You said I was carrying the weight of the world." He blinked. His gaze dropped to my hands. The tremor in his right arm seemed to skip a beat. "The crate," he whispered. "It was heavy. It smelled like cedar." "Yes," I said, moving a step closer, close enough that he could smell the jasmine oil I always wore behind my ears. "And you said you'd help me carry things for a long time. You're helping me now, Kellan. You're helping me find the way home." The fog in his eyes didn't fully clear, but a bridge formed, just a narrow, shaky rope bridge. He reached out with the good hand and touched my palm. "Amani? I'm here, baby. I'm right here." We walked back to the house in silence, but as soon as we crossed the threshold, something in me snapped. I realized that helping him wasn't enough. Labeling the house wasn't enough. I was playing defense against a thief that was never going to stop stealing. It was time to go on the offensive. "Sit down, Kellan," I said, leading him to the dining table. "I'm going to show you something." I went to my studio and grabbed a box I'd been keeping in the back. It was filled with seconds, pieces of glass that had come out wrong, flawed but beautiful in their own way. I dumped them onto the table. There were hundreds of shards, some smooth, some jagged, in every color of the spectrum. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sounding more like himself again. The ghost had retreated, leaving the man behind, exhausted and frightened. "This is our life, Kellan. It's broken, and it's messy, and it's hurting right now. But we're going to build something with it. You're an architect, right? You build things that last. You build things that withstand the wind." "I can't build anything, Amani. I can't even draw a straight line." Then don't draw lines, draw feelings. I spent the next 48 hours transforming our living room. I moved the furniture to the walls. I covered the floor in heavy canvas. I brought in buckets of sand, bowls of water, and pieces of raw iron. I realized that if Kellan's visual memory was failing, I had to engage his sensory memory. I called it the art of remembering. "Close your eyes," I told him on the third morning. He obeyed. I took his hand, the shaking one, and I plunged it into a bowl of warm sand. "What is that?" "The beach at Tybee Island, the night we stayed up to watch the sea turtles. It was warm, the moon was a sliver." "Good." I moved his hand to a piece of cold, wet glass. "The rain in New Orleans," he said, a small smile finally breaking through the tension on his face. "The day we met." We spent hours like that. I was building a map of our love that existed in his fingertips, in his nose, in his ears. I played the Miles Davis records he loved. I cooked the smuttered chops that filled the house with the scent of home. "You're trying to anchor me," he said, that evening as we sat on the floor in the middle of our sensory map. "Is it working?" He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, he really saw me, not the lady from the workshop, but his wife. "It's working, but Amani, the thief is getting stronger. I can feel the walls of the fortress getting thinner. There are parts of my brain that feel like they're underwater." "Then we'll learn to breathe underwater," I said, leaning in to kiss him. He tasted like the wine we were drinking, bittersweet and deep. The kiss wasn't just a kiss, it was a desperate reclaim. I wanted to etch the feeling of my lips into his soul so deeply that the disease would have to kill him to get rid of me. But as we lay there, tangled in each other's arms on the canvas floor, I noticed something. Kellan had fallen asleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. His right hand was resting on a stack of his old architectural blueprints that had been moved during the reorganization. I was going to put them away, but a yellow sticky note caught my eye. It was stuck to a set of plans for a project I'd never seen before. It wasn't a skyscraper. It wasn't a house. The title at the bottom read Project Lighthouse, a sanctuary for the fading. My hands started to shake. I flipped through the pages. It was a complete design for a facility, a place where people with his condition could live in beauty, not in sterile hospital rooms. It was designed around light, textures, and gardens. But it was the date on the blueprints that made me gasp. He hadn't started this 8 months ago when he was diagnosed. The date was from 3 years ago. I looked at my sleeping husband, the man who had been everything to me for a decade. A cold realization washed over me. He hadn't just hiding the diagnosis. He'd known something was wrong long before he ever told me. And as I turned to the final page of the blueprints, I saw a handwritten note in the margin. "For Amani, so she never has to be the one who turns out the lights." But there was a name scrawled at the bottom of the note that wasn't his, a name that made my blood run cold. It was the name of his business partner, a man I had trusted implicitly. And next to that name was a word that changed everything. Sold. Kellan hadn't just designed a sanctuary, he'd sold the rights to it, and the person he'd sold it to was the very person who was currently trying to force us out of our home. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the rise and fall of Kellan's shoulders, clutching those blueprints until the edges of the paper were soft and damp from the sweat of my palms. The name at the bottom, Sterling Vance, his own cousin, his business partner, the man who stood as best man at our wedding and held the other end of the broom when we jumped it. Sterling had always been the suit to Kellan's soul. Kellan designed the dreams, Sterling sold the reality. But looking at that word, sold, scrawled in Sterling's aggressive, slanted handwriting, I realized the reality he had been selling was our life. By 8 a.m., I had Kellan dressed and in the car. He was in one of his quiet phases, his eyes fixed on the Spanish moss draped over the Jones Street trees like tangled gray hair. He didn't ask where we were going. He just held a small glass bird I'd made, turning it over and over in his left hand, feeling the smooth curves. The offices of Vance and Sterling were located in a sleek glass and steel building overlooking the Savannah River. It was a building Kellan had designed to look like a ship at sea. Now it felt like a fortress I had to storm. I walked into the lobby, my heels clicking like gunfire on the white marble. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she'd been hired for her cheekbones rather than her competence, looked up with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Vance, we haven't seen you in weeks. Is Kellan here for a meeting?" "Kellan is here to see his office," I said, my voice as cold as the air conditioning. "And I'm here to see Sterling." "Oh, Mr. Sterling is in a very important meeting with the board regarding the lighthouse project. I don't think he can be disturbed." "Disturb him," I said, leaning over her desk, "or I will make a scene in this lobby that will make the local news look like a puppet show." She blinked, her smile faltering, and reached for the intercom. 5 minutes later, Sterling stepped out of the conference room. He looked impeccable, a three-piece navy suit, a silk tie the color of a bruise, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at Kellan, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something that looked like guilt, but it was gone before I could catch it, replaced with a mask of deep, performative concern. "Amani and Kellan, what a surprise," Sterling said, opening his arms as if he were going to hug us. I stepped back, pulling Kellan with me. "We need to talk about Project Lighthouse, Sterling, and the fact that you've marked it as sold to yourself." Sterling's face went stiff. He gestured towards his private office. "Let's take this inside. It's not a conversation for the hallway." Once the door was shut, the atmosphere changed. The caring cousin was gone. Sterling sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the very desk Kellan had bought him when they started the firm. "Amani, look," Sterling began, leaning forward. "Kellan isn't well. You know that better than anyone. He was making mistakes, big ones, costly ones. He was forgetting codes, missing deadlines. The board was going to oust him. I did what I had to do to protect the company. I bought out his shares and his patents to create a trust for his care. That money is paying for Willowcrest." "He doesn't want Willowcrest," I shouted, slamming the blueprints onto his desk. "He wants to be home, and he wants his legacy. This project, the Lighthouse Sanctuary, he designed this 3 years ago. He knew he was sick even then, didn't he? And you knew too." Sterling sighed, a sound of fake exhaustion. "He suspected. We both did. He came to me in confidence. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He signed the papers, Amani. Legally, it's all above board. I'm the majority owner of the firm now, and Project Lighthouse is a Vance and Sterling asset. I'm selling the design to a private developer in Dubai. The proceeds will ensure you and Kellan never want for anything." "You're selling his soul to the highest bidder," I whispered, "and you're doing it while he's still alive to see it." Beside me, Kellan suddenly spoke. His voice was low, but it had a strange, cutting clarity. "The windows are wrong." Sterling froze. "What was that, Kellan?" Kellan leaned over the desk, his shaking hand pointing at a detail on the blueprint. "The windows on the east wing need to be reinforced with leaded glass. For the acoustics, the silence is too loud otherwise. You forgot the lead, Sterling." Sterling laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "See, this is what I'm talking about. Leaded glass in a modern sanctuary? That's an outdated, expensive whim. This is why the firm needs a steady hand. Kellan, you're dreaming in a language nobody speaks anymore." I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting a security guard. Instead, it was Mrs. Gable. She was the firm's office manager, a woman who had been with Kellan since he was an intern. She was 60, with sharp blue eyes and a reputation for knowing where every literal and figurative body was buried in Savannah. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm, "the board members are asking for the final signature on the Dubai contract. They're in the lounge." "I'll be right there, Martha," said Sterling, standing up. He looked at me with a smirk. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Amani, but business doesn't stop for sentiment. You should take him home. He looks tired." As Sterling strutted out of the room, Mrs. Gable didn't follow him. She stayed by the door, watching him go. When the coast was clear, she turned to me and whispered 2 words that changed the gravity of the room. "Check the safe." "What?" I asked. "The key isn't in his hand. It's in her heart." I pulled it out. It was a simple, clear piece of glass, but it was heavy. I shook it. Something rattled inside. I'd worn this for 10 years, thinking the rattle was just a flaw in the glass, a bubble, a grain of sand. I didn't have tools, I didn't have a forge. I took the heavy glass heart and I smashed it against the edge of Sterling's mahogany desk. The glass shattered, and sitting in the middle of the shards was a tiny silver micro SD card wrapped in a scrap of paper that read, "The Real Blueprint." At that moment, the door burst open. It wasn't Mrs. Gable, it was Sterling, and he wasn't smiling anymore. He saw the shattered glass, he saw the silver card in my hand. "Give me that, Amani," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a threat. "That belongs to the firm." "No," I said, stepping back, clutching the card so hard the edges bit into my skin. "This belongs to the man you tried to erase." Sterling didn't move. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light from the hallway, his face twisted into something I didn't recognize. A mask of cold, corporate greed that had replaced the cousin I once knew. "You're out of your league, Amani," he said, his voice dropping into a low, predatory growl. "You're a glassblower. You play with fire and pretty colors. I run a multi-million-dollar firm. That card, it's company property. If you walk out that door with it, I'll have the police at your house before you can even pull into your driveway." I felt the weight of the silver micro SD card in my palm. It was tiny, no bigger than a fingernail, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was the only thing left of the man Kellan used to be. "Then call them," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I stepped forward, putting myself between Sterling and Kellan. "Call the police. Let's have them look at this company property together. Let's see what the board thinks when they find out you've been hiding the original patents for the lighthouse project. Let's see what the Dubai investors think when they realize you're selling them a watered-down, stolen version of a masterpiece." Sterling's eyes flickered to the card, then back to me. He was calculating. He was a man who lived by the numbers, and right now, the numbers weren't adding up in his favor. "You think you can prove any of that?" he sneered. "Kellan signed the transfer papers. I have the signatures. They're legal. They're notarized." "A signature from a man who didn't know the word for spoon isn't legal, Sterling. It's exploitation. And I think a jury in Savannah, a city that loves Kellan Vance, will agree with me." Beside me, Kellan shifted. He had been quiet, almost invisible in the tension of the room, but now he stood up. He didn't stumble. He didn't reach for my arm. He stood tall, his shoulders square, his amber eyes fixed on Sterling with a piercing intensity. "The bridge," Kellan whispered. Sterling rolled his eyes. "See, he's gone, Amani. He's talking to ghosts. Give me the card." "The bridge," Kellan repeated, his voice growing louder, more resonant. "The bridge between the mind and the hand. You can steal the hand, Sterling. You can buy the signature, but you don't have the bridge. You never did. You're an accountant in a designer suit." Kellan turned to me, and for a fleeting, beautiful second, the fog was gone. He reached out and took my hand, the one clutching the card. His grip was firm. The tremor was there, a faint vibration against my skin, but it didn't feel like a weakness anymore. It felt like an engine. "Show them, Amani," he said. "Show them the light." I didn't wait for Sterling to respond. I pushed past him, my shoulder hitting his with a force that made him stumble. I didn't head for the elevator. I headed for the conference room, the one where the board members and the Dubai investors were waiting. "Amani, get back here," Sterling shouted, his footsteps heavy on the marble behind us. I burst through the double doors of the conference room. The room was filled with men in dark suits sitting around a glass table that overlooked the river. The air smelled of expensive cologne and cold coffee. They all looked up in shock as a suit-stained woman in a silk dress and a man with a shaking hand interrupted their multi-million-dollar deal. "Mrs. Vance, what is the meaning of this?" one of the board members asked, standing up. "The meaning," I said, walking to the head of the table where a laptop was connected to a massive projector screen, "is that you're about to buy a lie." I didn't give them time to object. I slotted the micro SD card into the laptop. Sterling burst into the room a second later, his face purple with rage. "Don't listen to her. She's distraught. Her husband's condition has made her unstable." "Sit down, Sterling," the lead investor from Dubai said, his voice calm and authoritative. He pointed to the screen. "I want to see what the light has to say." The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a blueprint. It wasn't a legal document. It was a video. It was Kellan, 3 years ago. He was sitting in his home office, looking healthy, vibrant, and heartbreakingly handsome. He was looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," the video, Kellan said, his voice filling the room with a resonance that made the real Kellan squeeze my hand, "it means the shadows have finally caught up to me. It means my cousin, Sterling, has likely tried to do exactly what I feared he would, treat my life's work like a clearance sale." The room went deadly silent. Sterling looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. Project Lighthouse isn't just a building, it's a living system. The blueprints Sterling has are the shell. The real plans, the ones involving the leaded glass acoustics, the sensory gardens, and the light refraction therapy, are encrypted in this file. They require a biometric key, my handprint from 3 years ago. The video paused, and a prompt appeared on the screen. Voice command required. The board members looked at me. The investors looked at me. Sterling was shaking, his hands gripped so tight the knuckles were white. "Amani, don't," Sterling hissed. "Think about the money. Think about your future." I didn't even look at him. I looked at the real Kellan standing beside me. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered the word. I stepped up to the laptop. "Indestructible," I said. The screen exploded into a kaleidoscope of colors. The real blueprints, the soul of the building, began to scroll across the screen. They were beautiful. They were revolutionary. They were a gift from a man who knew he was leaving to the people he was leaving behind. "My God," the lead investor whispered, standing up to get a closer look at the light refraction designs. This is a masterpiece. This isn't just a clinic. This is a monument." He turned to Sterling, his expression hardening. "Mr. Sterling, you told us these designs didn't exist. You told us Mr. Vance was incapable of finishing the work. It seems the only thing incapable here is your integrity." I can explain," Sterling stammered. "Save it for the lawyers," the investor said. He walked over to Kellan and extended a hand. Kellan looked at the hand. He looked at his own shaking right arm. He didn't hide it. He reached out, and with a slow, deliberate movement, he shook the investor's hand. The tremor was there, but so was the strength. "The light," Kellan said, his voice clear. "It belongs to her." "We agree," the investor said. He looked at me. "Mrs. Vance, we want to build this exactly as Kellan designed it, with you as the creative director. We want Kellan's name on the front of the building in gold. Are you interested?" I looked at Kellan. He was smiling. A real, weary, but triumphant smile. I felt a surge of victory so powerful, it felt like the heat from the forge. We're not just interested, we're ready. But as we walked out of that glass building, the sun setting over the Savannah River, I felt Kellan's grip on my hand loosen. I looked at him, and the spark in his eyes was fading again. The bridge was swaying. "Amani?" he asked, his voice sounding like a child's. "Who was that man in the TV? He looked like me." My heart broke again, but I just pulled him closer. "That was a hero, Kellan. That was you." The victory at the firm felt like a roar, but the aftermath was a whisper. We walked out of those glass doors as owners of a legacy, but as the Savannah humidity wrapped around us, I realized I was bringing home a man who was becoming a shadow. The next few months were a blur of construction and destruction. The construction was the lighthouse project, Kellan's dream rising from the ground on the riverfront. The destruction was the slow, methodical erasure of my husband's motor skills. I moved our bed to the sunroom on the first floor. I wanted him to see the garden. I wanted him to see the light hitting the oak trees. We stopped using the dining table. I sat on the floor with him, feeding him small bites of food, turning every meal into a quiet ritual of touch. "Amani," he whispered one afternoon, his eyes fixed on a cardinal perched on the bird feeder. "Yes, Kellan?" "The light is different today. It's heavy, like gold leaf." He hadn't mentioned light in weeks. My heart leapt, a flicker of hope that the medication or the therapy was working. But then he looked at me, and his eyes were clear. shattering, crystal clear in a way they hadn't been since the day in the conference room. "I need you to listen," he said. His voice was steady, the tremor in his throat momentarily silenced. "The project, it's almost finished. I saw the drone footage you showed me yesterday. It's beautiful, Amani. It's exactly what I saw in my head when I was still whole." "You are whole, Kellan," I said, clutching his hand. "No," he smiled, a soft, sad curve of his lips. "I'm a building with a collapsing roof, but the foundation is you. It's always been you. I need you to promise me that when the doors open, you won't look for me in the lobby. You won't look for me in the offices." "Where will I find you?" He reached out, his hand moving with a painful, slow grace, and touched the glass pendant I had replaced, the new one, solid and unbreakable. "In the light, in the way the windows make people feel safe. I'm not my brain, Amani. I'm not this shaking hand. I'm the thing I built for you." That night, the drop scene happened. I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound I hadn't heard in a year. It was the sound of the glass forge igniting. I ran to the studio, my heart in my throat. I expected to find a fire or a confused man wandering into danger. Instead, I found Kellan sitting in front of the furnace. He had managed to turn the gas on. He was holding a blowpipe, his right hand shaking so violently the metal was clattering against the stone bench. He was trying to pick up a glob of molten glass. "Kellan, stop, you'll burn yourself." He didn't stop. He was focused, his brow furrowed in a mask of pure agony. He was fighting his own nerves, his own failing synapses for one last act of creation. "I have to finish the echo," he gasped. I didn't try to take the pipe away. I knew in that moment that if I stopped him, I would be killing him faster than the disease ever could. I walked up behind him. I wrapped my arms around his waist, and I placed my hands over his. I became the bridge he had talked about. My steady hands clamped over his trembling ones, absorbing the vibration, stilling the metal. Together, we dipped the pipe into the furnace. Together, we pulled out a glowing orange heart of liquid fire. "Now," I whispered into his ear, "breathe." He didn't have the lung capacity to blow the glass, so I did it for him. I blew into the pipe while he used his failing fingers to guide the shears and the jacks. We worked in a synchronized dance of desperation and love. The heat was immense, a physical wall that kept the rest of the world away. We weren't an artist and an architect. We were two souls trying to catch lightning in a bottle. When the piece was finished, we placed it in the analyzer to cool. Kellan collapsed back into my arms, his strength completely gone. He was sweating, his breath coming in ragged gulps. "What did we make?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "An echo," he whispered, "of the day we met, so you can always feel the fire." The next morning, Kellan woke up and didn't know who I was. He looked at me with a polite, vacant smile and asked if I was the nurse who brought the tea. The bridge had finally collapsed. The man who designed the lighthouse was gone, leaving behind a kind, quiet stranger who liked to watch the birds. But I went to the analyzer. I opened the door and pulled out the piece we had made together. It was a glass sphere, perfectly clear, but inside was a swirl of deep amber and iron red that looked like a trapped flame. And when the morning sun hit it, it didn't just reflect the light, it cast a pattern on the wall that looked exactly like two hands intertwined. It was the drop scene of our marriage, the final act of the man I loved. A week later, the lighthouse project officially opened. The entire city of Savannah was there. Sterling was nowhere to be found. Rumor had it he'd fled to a smaller firm in another state to avoid the scandal. I stood on the steps of the building, the glass and leaded windows glowing in the sunset, just as Kellan had designed. I didn't give a long speech. I didn't talk about the disease or the betrayal. I just held up the glass sphere we had made in the middle of the night. My husband told me that light is a language, and this building is his final word. It's a word for everyone who feels like they're disappearing. It says, "You are seen. You are safe. You are held." I looked at the front row where Kellan was sitting in his wheelchair. He was looking at the building, his head tilted to the side. He didn't know it was his. He didn't know I was his wife. But as the sun hit the windows and the river reflected a river of gold onto the lobby floor, Kellan reached out and did the double squeeze with his left hand against the armrest of his chair. "I love you." He didn't know why he was doing it, but the body remembered what the brain had lost. I realized then that the surprise of our story wasn't the betrayal or the gallery. It was the fact that love isn't a memory at all. It's a frequency, and even when the radio is broken, the signal never stops. The opening of the Lighthouse Project was the end of one story, but it was the beginning of a much larger conversation. As I sat there in the front row, watching the sun dip below the Savannah horizon, I looked at Kellan. His hands were still. For the first time in a year, the tremor had subsided, calmed by the rhythmic sound of the river and the soft, leaded glass acoustics he had designed for himself and others like him. He didn't know he was a hero. He didn't know he had saved his own legacy from the clutches of greed. But I knew. And as I held the glass sphere we had made together, the echo, I realized that we all have a lighthouse inside of us. We all have a light that we're trying to keep from going out. Kellan is in a different stage now. Most days, he lives in a world of 1995, talking about architecture professors and the first time he saw the ocean. I don't correct him anymore. I don't pull him back to the painful present. Instead, I go there with him. I've learned that love isn't about holding someone in the light you want them to be in. It's about sitting with them in whatever shadow they've found themselves in. Sterling Vance tried to steal a building, but you can't steal a soul. He's gone, but the light is here. And every time a family walks through those doors, feeling the same fear I felt on that cold morning at Willowcrest, they are greeted by the warmth of a man who loved his wife enough to build a fortress for her memory. Direct address. I'm telling you this story not because it has a perfect happily ever after, but because it has a happily ever now. Life isn't a blueprint. It's not a straight line on a piece of vellum. It's a messy, heated, beautiful process of blowing glass. Sometimes it shatters, sometimes it's flawed, but it's always, always worth the fire. I want to thank you for walking this path with me, for feeling the heat of the forge and the chill of that hospital hallway. Stories like mine and Kellan's are happening in houses all over the world. There are thousands of lighthouses being built by people who refuse to let the darkness win. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever had to be the bridge for someone you love, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves? Have you ever found a secret that changed everything? Drop a comment below and share your indestructible moment. Let's make this space a sanctuary for our own stories. And if you want to see more stories of resilience, love, and the hidden truths that bind us together, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We are building something beautiful here, one echo at a time. Until next time, keep your fire burning, and remember, you have enough memory for the both of you.